Hello, I'm Dr. Bernard Starr, your host for another edition of Active Aging Stories, programs that introduce you to vital and vibrant people who demonstrate that age is no barrier to creativity and productive living. Their stories help dispel the myth that getting older means giving up on a lifelong passion or losing one's zest for living. Few illustrate this better than Captain Norman Baker, a lifelong man of the sea and a man for all seasons.
What motivates someone to attempt an ocean voyage in a 16-foot reed boat, built exactly as ancient mariners did centuries ago? Few are more qualified to answer that than Captain Norman Baker, who sailed with the legendary Thor Heyerdahl, and now at the age of 81 is still enthralled with the sea and its challenges.
I actually fell in love with the sea when I was a youngster. And we used to bicycle to a bluff overlooking the sea and overlooking Floyd Bennett Field. While I was there, I was absolutely fascinated watching the ships leaving the port of New York. I resolved that someday I wanted to sail over the horizon. Well, I went to Cornell University and I graduated as a Bachelor of Civil Engineering. And that's what I worked at, civil engineering. Except when I was at sea. In fact, my first job out of school was to survey the boundary between Colorado and New Mexico. We had to travel on horseback and carry our supplies by mule. It was a hard job, and I loved it. When I got into my sleeping bag out there on the mesa, I used to think, wow, what fun, and they're paying me for this. My friend called me up and said, Norm, how would you like to meet Thor Heyerdahl? Well, I said, I've already met him, but I'd love to see him again. And my friend said, well, here he is at this phone number. I called him up, and Thor and I had dinner together, alone, just the two of us. And the dinner must have lasted at least 3 hours. And Thor at the moment was telling me about wanting to build a replica of an ancient boat, to test the boat, to see if it could make it across the Atlantic Ocean. Well, I could see going to sea on a balsa log raft where the logs were each this big around. I said, reeds? He said, yes, reed boats. Well, how big are the reeds? He said, well, the largest end of the reed is about as big as your wrist, and the smallest end is about as big as your thumb. And I said, reeds, Thor? And I thought, golly, he's really lost it. You can't sail reeds across an ocean. After all, I had been a sailor. I'd been across oceans. You can't do that in a reed boat. But by the end of 3 hours, I was convinced that, yeah, these things were used thousands of years ago. By this time, I had this wonderful wife, Mary Ann, and I had 3 children. I had a house with a mortgage, crabgrass on the lawn, and in-laws that might think kindly of my taking myself away from their daughter. But anyway, I went home and I said to Mary Ann that Thor Heyerdahl had invited me to go on this crazy expedition. I missed the sea, and Mary Ann knew that. And so it was with Mary Ann's encouragement that I went back to sea. I wanted to be so far out of land, so far away from land, that I could turn 360 degrees around and be totally out of sight of the shore. Well, the United States Navy took good care of that. Well, my first voyage with Thor Heyerdahl was to test the reed boats, which were designed 4,000 years ago, to see if they were capable of crossing the ocean. Because Thor, in his research, had put together 135 cultural identical points between the ancient Mediterranean civilizations and the ancient American civilizations. And presenting this to anthropologists at seminars, they laughed at him, they ridiculed him. Come on, Dr. Heyerdahl, how does mankind cross the ocean before man invented ships? And Thor would say, well, yes, they didn't have wooden ships then, but they had these boats made of reeds. And these reed boats were used for 1,000 years before wooden ships eventually began to replace them. Thor wouldn't allow any two crew members to come from the same country. He said that on Kon-Tiki, we were as alike as peas in a pod. Every one of us was a Scandinavian. And he said that I had been made president of the World Federalist Organization. I never did a thing for them. I want to do something for them. I want to show the world, or hope we can show the world, that people as different as possible can get along, at least be an effective crew, and maybe even wind up friends. And that's why he didn't allow anybody to come from the same country. We had 7 men from 7 different countries, and we wound up broken in the ocean after sailing 2,700 nautical miles, still 500 miles short of land. So we sent a mayday to our Norwegian radio amateurs with whom I had been in contact every 2 or 3 days, and they sent out word to ships to look for us. And they actually contacted a ship in Barbados to see if they could come find us. And with my sextant, I need a flat horizon, because with a sextant, what I'm doing with every celestial body is just measuring the angle between the horizon and the celestial body, whether it's the sun, the stars, the moon, the planets. And then I have to have a watch to tell me exactly the moment of taking that angle. Well, we had a radio, and I used to get radio time signals and correct my wristwatch, knowing how many minutes and seconds it was off. So I would use that as a correction for the time. And when we were sinking, when we were broken up and sinking, my horizon, instead of being 5 or 6 or 8 miles away, my horizon was very close. And my horizon consisted of waves. So I had to kind of average out between the crest and the trough where the horizon would be. And even then, I could only take my shot when our little boat was at the top of a wave. So I would turn the dial and then wait till we sank to the trough and come up again. And I had to move the dial because the celestial body had changed its angle. And so after doing that for a dozen times, I had a feeling for how far I had to turn the little wheel on my sextant between each sight at the top of a wave. But doing that, my position was very approximate, and they couldn't find us. And a reed boat makes a very, very poor radar target. So even radar couldn't locate us. We were practically the same density as the water. And they searched for us for 8 days. And finally, on the 8th day, I told the rescue ship, "I see you. We're off your port bow. Turn a little bit left and you'll come to us." I saw them before they could see us. Thor got the funding. His film won the Cannes Film Festival and was distributed worldwide. And his book, Kon-Tiki, was published in greater number than any other book before, other than the Bible. And the worldwide sales of Kon-Tiki and the worldwide distribution of his film, Kon-Tiki, allowed Thor to collect enough money to do his research and his next expedition without needing funding from anyone else. I did have one expedition which the Explorers Club helped to fund, and that was the Anna Christina expedition around the world. And by the time we finished working on Anna Christina, it was 3 years. It had expended all of our money, and I never completed that expedition. Anna Christina was built in 1868 in Norway, and Anna Christina was the sister ship of Roald Amundsen's Arctic exploration ship, Joa. And it was on Joa, Anna Christina's sister ship, that discovered the Northwest Passage. And we chartered Anna Christina in Canada. And with the charters of Anna Christina, we were able to pay off the second mortgage in about 3 years. Well, Anna Christina never left the dock for 9 years. All 9 years that we owned her, she never left the dock without me. But Mystic Seaport Museum asked me to lecture about Anna Christina because she was, after all, an historic ship. She was the oldest ship in the world in continuous service. We'd been chartering in Canada all summer. We now had 2 charters in the Caribbean that winter. And I needed a gap of 2 weeks ashore to do this filming, to do this editing for film and composing a lecture. So I gave my ship to a young captain who was also an ocean master, rated captain. And he took Anna Christina to deliver her for me to the Caribbean. After my lecture, I would fly down, take command of my ship again, and do the charters. And he ran into the perfect storm. And he abandoned Anna Christina in the perfect storm. The commanding officer of the Coast Guard base asked for volunteers if they would strap external tanks on the helicopters and see if they could reach Anna Christina 330 miles off Cape Hatteras. The 4 people on that helicopter saved all 9 on Anna Christina. When she was abandoned, she sank. So she's under 12,000 feet of cold Atlantic water. I have been accepting cruises and lecturing about the expeditions on which I participate. And they have been wonderful. I only began to accept those invitations after I lost Mary Ann. So that's one wonderful thing that I've been doing. But in the Explorers Club, we have people from all over the world, and the Canadians do whitewater river camping. I can't see retiring. I mean, what do you mean by retiring? Does retiring mean doing nothing? I'm never going to do nothing. Now, every week I ride thoroughbred horses over jumps. And I do that with great success. I rarely knock over a jump, rarely run out or refuse. And I still fly. I bought my airplane in 1996 with my wife's encouragement. After we lost Anna Christina, I went back to flying. And so I have my airplane and I fly all over the country. So yeah, I go with these. I've been skiing with my grandchildren this winter. And even though they can now beat me down the mountain, at least I can keep up with them.
The poet John Masefield wrote, "I must down to the sea again, to the lonely sea and the sky, and all I ask is a tall ship and a star to steer her by." This clearly is the passion of Captain Baker and offers inspiration to us all to follow our own passions and interests. Another octogenarian who does exactly that is author Anne Morris. Having traveled the world and written more than 80 children's books, she continues to produce stories that are beloved by children all over the world, while she engages in a remarkably active life.
We're visiting this afternoon with Anne Morris in her lovely apartment, Upper West Side of New York City. Anne has had a remarkable career as a writer of books for children, She's published over 80 books in a long and diverse career. She's also had many, many other interests in her life. She's a great traveler. She describes herself as a gypsy by nature, with her suitcase always packed and ready to go. She's worked as an important editor for Scholastic Incorporated's editor of children's books, and she has especially focused on ethnic diversity in the United States and abroad in her writing. Today we're going to talk with her about her career, but also we'd like to hear about the things she's doing. She's past the 80-year mark and going strong with lots of different interests.
I've been trying to cut back a little and to do some things that feel, really like a particular interest to me. I am trying to sell a book I did about Israel. I went a couple of years ago with a trip that the Jewish Museum was sponsoring with Peter Linenthal, my wonderful photographer I've done so much work with, and we went to Israel, and I've done a book for young children about the basic sites in Israel, and it's called I Love Israel. I've been to everywhere. I have done a book on the tsunami. I've done a book on Russia. I had to go twice to do my first book on Russia because it was pre-perestroika. I've had a lot of adventures, and I traveled a lot with students, traveling around in a Volkswagen bus, driving them all over. I go out and I find all kinds of things, and my apartment is filled with things that I find, and I recently found this wonderful little statue. It's over there, and it's a copy I found out through somebody who knows a lot of. It's like 2,000 years old. It's it's just amazing that I found this right in the street. My house is filled with things that I find. In every place you go, there's all kinds of bread and different variations. So I have a lot of pictures there, and from all over. At that time, I was working with Ken Hyman, who was Margaret Mead's photographer, and another wonderful photographer I've spent time with, and he had a lot, and some of the ones I get from, from research, and but it shows, even bread on your head. The children always laugh because in some cultures they carry the bread on their head, and I have, bread that's used in religious experiences. I have, traditionally baked bread. I have somebody I knew years ago making bread in my kitchen. So I have pictures of that, and each one's a story. And in the back of all my multicultural books, I have a little further explanation about, what country the bread is from, and a little paragraph about, which explains a little more. So the child who's learning to read can read the very simple text, but the teacher can explain more. Grandmothers, are nurturing and took care of the food, and seemed to provide for much of the education, and I don't know, it's just the grandmothers I met were amazing. They provide the food, very often the music. Sometimes they have old photographs. They have the loving traditions in the style that is their culture to convey, and some are more intellectual than others, but it doesn't matter. Each one were so rich in terms of really bringing something very warm and meaningful. Was the Chinese grandma, Mary Lam. What an extraordinary woman. She is from San Francisco, and she has built in a tiny little area a whole career. She's a psychologist for the whole Chinese community. Her children have learned to play the piano. They They cook. Grandma Esther was one of my favorites. She was an escapee from Poland, from Lithuania, and she was the only one who got out of a ghetto because a priest had brought papers into the ghetto, but only for one person. And she made her way totally across Europe, and she got on one of those wonderful ships, you know, for refugees. After all that, she survived because she could speak perfect German. She was very smart. She stood on the German food lines. Anyway, she got on the ship. She was on one of those ships that made their way all the way to Jerusalem then, and the ship was turned back. I've had innumerable problems on censorship. Really, there's just too many. In fact, sometimes with one publisher and then another who will buy rights, they'll change pictures, and then there are all kinds of things you're not allowed to show in books now, and I think I once made a list of about 18 or 20 things that are censorable. Different states are different. In some states you can't show wine, and so they changed a book where I had a Jewish Seder, and they took the picture of the Seder was showing the wine, which is so important, and then they changed it to another picture where they had empty wine glasses. Ridiculous. When another company bought rights, they changed two pictures. One was showing somebody bathing a child in a tub, and they said you couldn't see her hand. So, and the other picture, it was just ridiculous. It was a child naked, having a shower, and so in the other edition, they just changed those both pictures. What's happening in schools here, and what they're expecting of children, and having to pass all these ridiculous tests, and not understanding that children have a broader culture, and that there are creative aspects that help them to learn all sorts of things. And there are a few people still hanging in, like Jacques d'Amboise and his National Dance Institute I admire so much, but it's really hard because what they're advocating now, I think, is just disgusting. I exercise a great deal. It really helps me. I go 3 or 4 times a week to the JCC nearby, and I do a special project called PACE. People with arthritis can exercise. I love the name. And I do moderate aerobics and some other things there. So I do that, and I have a private library I've joined, which I just love. It's my home away from home. It's on the east side, the New York Society Library, and sometimes I'll walk across the park and go, or take the bus right there. I do volunteer work for learning leaders. I take my Writer Bear, and if I forget Writer Bear, the children say, "You didn't bring Writer Bear." Most, kind of fun project is, I've been talking with some people at Zabar's, and they always have these wonderful little bears that they sell. And I want to do a package for Zabar's that has to do with the 3 bears and Goldilocks. So there'd be a package of locks, and then there'd be a big basket, and they'd have all kinds of nice things. When I'm working with college students, sometimes I work with groups who want to write children's books. Then I say, never pay attention to the rules. And that's my motto.
Proving that age does not stop the creative process, Anne Morris also shows that if your health permits, it is still possible to participate in favorite activities and enlarge your horizons. The same might be said for the volunteers of retired professionals who produce these programs. Even now they are working on new stories about older people who are aging well and aging actively. Look for them every other Sunday evening at 7:30 on MNN, Manhattan Neighborhood Network, your local public access television station. If you have any suggestions for active aging stories, contact Shirley at yoelyoel.com. Should any of your suggestions be accepted, you will be invited to be an honorary producer and appear on the program. In the meantime, I'm Dr. Bernard Starr for Active Aging Stories.